pleased to say that Professor Kate Williams joins me, historian, author, TV presenter and expert tweeter, because it was a tweet. Kate Williams, good afternoon to you, by the way.
Good afternoon.
It was a tweet you sent last night and a thread that developed around it that prompted my idea today to talk about Britain's greatness and the kinds of things that are said often in conversations around Brexit about what we are or were great at and what was or will be great about Britain. Again, you focused on the war, Second World War. Tell me why.
Well, I focused on the war because there was a gentleman interviewed by BBC Newsnight who doesn't stand alone in this. I think there's a lot of conversation around this in which he was saying that the reason why Brexit is fine is because, as he put it, we beat the Germans, we liberated France, we liberated Belgium. And what I was saying is that this is a very pervasive view in the public imagination. And a lot of politicians say it as well. This sort of idea that Britain won World War II and really on its own, with excluding the support of the Empire soldiers, of Australia, of the Commonwealth, excluding the Russian front, in which, you know, the majority, we might argue the majority of Hitler's soldiers were fighting in the Russian front, the work of the occupied populations in France and Belgium, excluding all the contributions, huge amounts of contributions to what was indeed a world war. It really was a world war. And forgetting all of this, you know, there's been lots of conversations about the Polish aircraft fighters. So this idea that we won, we built the role of the USA, we won, we beat them, I think really excludes how much we relied on others, how important Britain's contribution was. Important, of course it was, and vital. But so were those of others, and many of those who we now seem to try and be separating ourselves from as enemies. And so that really concerned me, and I do feel that it is partly the role of the role of historians to try and engage with this. Why have we got this story in the public imagination that is being repeated, and now it is being used to bolster the fact that to bolster the ideas of leave voting. We'll be fine to leave. It's fine to have no deal because we beat the Germans. When obviously, I mean, I personally didn't. Very few people who were involved in the war are still alive, and our answer, you know, it's a very different. It's a completely different world now. Then now, it's completely false equivalency. But also, the war was not simply. We would not have won the war by ourselves.
And certainly not without America involvement, and as you mentioned, all the other European allies in the years before that. I mean, the death toll speaks for itself in a sense, doesn't it? It is not to detract for 1 second from the British sacrifice and effort, not for a moment. But 800,000 combined US-British deaths, 27 million Russian deaths.
Yes, exactly. As you say, the death toll is huge. And I think we are beginning to look more at the role of Empire soldiers. We're beginning to look more at there's more awareness of Empire soldiers. Certainly there's been a bit of increasing awareness of Empire soldiers in World War I and in World War II and Commonwealth soldiers. But really, the fact the contribution of allies and the Eastern Front, Romania, Eastern Europe and Russia, really, there are many arguments that it was Russia that conquered Hitler, not us and Churchill. Yes, we held firm, but it was Russia in its place. And so the fact is that if we continue these narratives, and politicians are fond of turning up, repeating these narratives as well. If we continue these narratives, they're damaging in so many ways. They're not only a complete misrepresentation of history, they're also really giving ourselves a false independence and exceptionalism. We're not that great,
and we're not that great. That'll get people going.
It was a great and important contribution, but simply the fact that one tiny country could win World War II on its own, that is the idea that has been held down, and it's just not the case. And it's very interesting because I was looking at some other newspapers and how they're seeing Brexit in Europe, because of course it's being figured here so many ways about, we won the war, so it's fine, we'll leave and it's all, and the no deal will be just like the Blitz, when we forget that the Blitz was a highly organised there was a lot of civil organisation around the Blitz to ensure that things proceeded smoothly, and there was very careful, and rationing was a very careful system to ensure that everyone that food was carefully managed. We forget all of that, if we do this vision that has been really portion of the public imagination, far too simple vision, is really, I think, is a problem.
I've got a caller, Andy, who's angered by what you're saying. Are you happy to have a brief chat with him?
That's fine.
Okay, Andy in Chessington, hello.
Hello, Sheila. Good afternoon.
What are you angered about, Andy?
I'm angered. It's a major point, and that is, of course, it was a world war, and there was a lot of sacrifice by a lot of people. But only one country stood alone against Germany at the start of it all. One country. And that wasn't Australia, that wasn't America, that wasn't any of the other lists that's been mentioned. It was Britain, and it was around Britain that the other nations galvanised. It was not us galvanising around Australia or India or all the other important efforts, the Polish pilots that have been mentioned. Of course they did that, and they should be honoured and have been. But it was Britain that stood alone, and that, I think, needs to be absolutely emphasised.
Kate?
Well, Britain stood alone, we would argue, when it does stand alone, it stands alone with the huge resources of an empire that it collected through so many ways of oppression. The empire soldiers, we often forget the importance of the empire soldiers. They often excluded the fact that how much contribution they give. I had these really interesting people say when they go to the war graves, they see all these wars these graves of different people all over the world. Britain's contribution is important. Britain had a key contribution, but the fact is that it was a world war won by so many parts of the world. That is the whole point. And so we cannot say that we beat the Germans. We cannot say that we liberated France. We cannot say that we liberated Belgium. Just we.
We can say that the rest of them would not have been involved if we hadn't stood there in the first place, because no one would have been inviting the Indian soldiers across to Europe or any of those other great nations that you've mentioned, quite rightly. But without us there as the anchor, it wouldn't have happened. And we would not be free to make a decision about whether we're in Europe or out of Europe.
Okay, go on,
Kate. We would be in it, and we'd be in whatever the Third Reich had ever become. That's where we would be.
Go on, Kate.
It would have happened without all of these countries joined together, and we forget about the vital resistance of the occupied populations. They liberated themselves as well.
We don't forget about them. The point is that if we hadn't been there for them to galvanise around, it would not have happened. The French resistance would not have fought off.
All right, don't shout, Andy. Don't shout. Go on, Kate. Respond to what Andy's saying.
It would have happened. It simply would have happened. It would have happened. The invasion. We have to look here about how much we appeased Hitler initially. There was a heavy appeasement from Britain. If the World War would not have escalated in the way it had if we had cracked down much earlier. There are many faults in the British engagement with this. Yes, it would have happened without Britain. It simply would have done. There's no way of saying, yes, the British contribution was as important as everyone. The British sacrifice was incredible. Britain held firm. Britain was tough. But along this way, it was a world war. And saying that it is, and, obviously, what you're saying that Britain was important to it is not the same as saying we beat the Germans. And it's that you don't hear the argument that we hear over and over again is we beat the Germans. It is who do you think your film?
But Andy, you obviously, but Kate, Andy obviously sees a singularity about how Britain responded once the war was in full flow.
I think it was a group effort. It was a group activity, and we cannot say we liberated France and Belgium. It was a group liberation, and also we cannot undermine not just the people in Nazi Germany who were resisting, not just the people in Nazi occupied territories who were resisting, but the people across. We have to look at those people who are resisting as well.
And can I ask, just a final thought really around Germany in particular, because there is still that we beat the Germans, which I think it's what prompted my conversation with you. Is I hear it so often when I talk to people on this programme. If Germany lost the war, they do say, don't they, that it won the peace, and now it's deemed to be, the driving force of the European Union, and stole a march on Britain and the rest of Europe, really, after the war, eventually, to set up an educational, industrial, technological growth that was unrivaled in Europe, possibly still is unrivaled in Europe. Is that what people mean when they say Germany won the peace?
That is what they mean when they say Germany won the peace. That is what they mean, that it progressed so very quickly. And it progressed from, if you look at Depression-era Germany, it was in a terrible state of poverty. I mean, poverty was across Europe, particularly bad in the Great Depression in America, bad in Britain, but Germany was in a dire state, and we have to look at how much are the reparations imposed on Germany after the Treaty of Versailles agreed and encouraged by Britain, encouraged this extreme poverty, which in itself is a marvellous breeding ground for fascism. But Germany did win the peace, and Germany did create, and this is a different Germany. That's why because bringing up the war is, I think, so distressing to so many Germans, because they see themselves, they are a peaceful country. They hate what had gone on before. They hate Nazism. Most of those are dead, but they hate every part of it. And it's very, very distressing and very cruel, I think, to these Germans who feel so guilty about it and so wrong about it, to constantly bring it up.
Although we do see a kind of resurgence, not huge yet, but significant resurgence of far right politics in Germany, don't we, with the successes electorally of the ADF recently? But that's a whole other conversation for another day. Kate Williams, great to have you on. Professor Kate Williams, historian, author and TV presenter.